My name's Johny Pitts. I'm a writer, broadcaster and artist who works with words and images, and I'm the curator of After the End of History, British Working Class Photography 1989 to 2024 in collaboration with the Harewood Gallery and currently at Bonington Gallery in Nottingham. Brian Cass, who's the head curator at the Harewood Gallery, got in touch with me after reading a book that I wrote called Afropean, Notes from Black Europe, and this was a travelogue that mixed words and images around Europe, looking at black communities. And I think Brian was just interested in seeing what that kind of gaze that created that book, how that would look if in a kind of curatorial aspect. And I took it in quite a different direction actually. I initially thought I'd want to make a show about black British photographers, but when I started to look at some of my favourite photographers, I actually felt that their work was way more interesting in a wider context. And what that allowed me to do then is think about class and think about, you know, who some of these black photographers grew up with, and then what that said about society. And so it became this kind of quite multicultural show that was more about class than ethnicity. I was born in the 1980s, and I found that very often when working class people were depicted or part of a show, that we never got past the 1980s, and so you have the miners' strike, and you have steel workers with blackened faces, or kids with no shoes on in black and white on council estates and stuff. But it never seemed to emerge into the 1990s and beyond, and in colour. And that's when I started thinking of this notion by this economist called Francis Fukuyama, who came up with this. I mean, it seems a bit funny now, but this notion of the end of history. He wrote this paper in 1989 when there was the fall of communism, that now it was the end of history, and that there'd only be one way forward, and that'd be like Western liberal democracy, and that was the only kind of culture or economy under which people would live. Actually, I do think that the lives of working class people started to assume a different look, and suddenly you had, I mean, I'm from Sheffield, so you had like shopping centres like Meadowhall Shopping Centre built on the grounds of an old steelworks. This kind of moved past industry and into something kind of different and weird and hard to pin down when it comes to like working class culture. And I think in some ways it destroyed working class culture, and then throughout the 90s and 2000s you start to get to see these reconfigurations, and I think that's what this exhibition attempts to achieve, is what working class culture started to look like after this sort of, it was crushed under Thatcherism. I think what you have is photographers with one foot in and one foot outside of the scenes that they're documenting. So I think they're all practicing photographers, but like they're documenting the scenes that they know. So, you know, Ewan Spencer, knows about UK garage and took all these photographs in Ayia Napa in the early 2000s of the UK garage scene. What you also have, because it's the nature of working class photography, is, if you look at all the very famous photographers from the 20th century, people like Henri Cartier-Bresson and William Eggleston, they're all from like vast wealth, they're from a lot of money, so it meant that they could sort of wander around Flaneur and work on these long projects and take photographs of very quiet scenes and hone their craft slowly. But for a lot of working class photographers, they couldn't afford to do that. So you have a lot of like work on the hoof, where it's like they've got a camera with them, they're going out clubbing, taking photographs of the clubs, or they're working as a waitress, as in Anna Magnovska, which is just behind me, and making photographs while on the job there. Or there's somebody who's working as a night porter in a hotel and had a camera on them. So it's like almost like the camera, they're not going into these different worlds on like some kind of culture safari. The camera just happens to be with them throughout their lives. It was really important for me to try and make an exhibition that didn't feel pretentious and didn't feel like it was designed for art collectors. It was really important for me that like people from the types of places that I grew up in, which is Firth Park in Sheffield, felt at home here. You can do that through the curation, through the images that you take, but also through the kind of way that I tried to make it a comforting space. I wanted anything but a white gallery space, so like we made quite dark walls that might invoke a little bit, like a nightclub maybe. And then even we worked with a local designer called Designers Republic, and created, I think, an aesthetic that is almost reminiscent of like nightclubs in the 2000s. I feel like art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And so what I hope is that people who are going through a tough time or have been through a tough time over the last few years can come in here and just feel a sense of comfort, or maybe even nostalgia, or just recognise themselves in the works on the walls.